A millionaire came across an abandoned child and an infant. He took them home, then contacted the police the next day. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, a glowing web stretching beneath Michael Grant as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxurious penthouse office. At 53, Michael had reached heights most only dream of: unmatched wealth, power, and a sprawling estate just beyond the city limits. Yet, as he gazed out at the urban sprawl below, the same hollow feeling that had lingered for years weighed heavy on him. His entire existence revolved around his business empire. But deep down, he knew something was missing, something he couldn't quite name. The usual comforting silence of his office felt suffocating tonight. He turned away from the window, letting his eyes wander across the room, a space that had seen countless deals and decisions that had shaped his empire. The rich wood paneling and leather furniture spoke of legacy and influence, but to Michael, they were just stark reminders of the cost of his so-called success. As he walked toward his desk, his eyes landed on a face-down photo frame. With a pause, he reached for it and flipped it over, revealing the smiling faces of a younger Michael and his former business partner, Daniel Whitmore. A wave of regret swept over him as memories of their painful fallout surged back. "You'll regret this." Dominic's parting words echoed in his head, a haunting reminder of the day Michael had ruthlessly forced him out of their company. It was a turning point in Michael's career, where he chose ambition over loyalty, profits over friendship. He set the frame back down, this time leaving it face up, a reminder he no longer wanted to hide. The guilt he had buried for years resurfaced, no matter how much he focused on building his empire. The weight of his past choices never truly faded. With a heavy sigh, Michael moved to the minibar in the corner of his office. The amber liquid poured into the glass, promising a fleeting escape from his thoughts. As he raised the tumbler to his lips, his phone buzzed on his desk. Frowning, he walked over to check it. A message from his security team alerted him to a disturbance near one of his properties downtown. On any other night, Michael would have handed this off to his staff, but tonight, driven by a restlessness he couldn't explain, he decided to handle it himself. As he slipped into his coat and headed for the elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change. The city stretched out before him, a maze of light and shadow, hiding secrets he had yet to uncover. Little did Michael know, this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he had built and everything he thought he knew about himself. Michael Grant, the man who prided himself on always being in control, was about to have his world turned upside down. The sleek, black car cut smoothly through the city streets, its quiet hum a stark contrast to the chaos in Michael's mind. The streetlights flickered in rhythmic patterns across the car's interior, casting a hypnotic glow that lulled him into a trance. The night was cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones even from the comfort of his luxury car. As Michael neared the site of the reported disturbance, he found himself in a part of the city he rarely ventured to. The glitz of his world had no presence here. The streets were darker, the buildings worn with time. Slowing the car, he scanned the sidewalks, searching for signs of the issue his security team had flagged. Then, suddenly, the headlights revealed something that made Michael slam on the brakes. Under the dim flicker of a street lamp, he saw a small figure crouched on the sidewalk. It was a child, barely visible in the weak light. Beside the child, wrapped in a tattered blanket, was a baby. Michael froze, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. This was far from the scenario he expected, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. The child, no older than 6, looked up as the car's headlights washed over him. There was something in the boy's expression, an unsettling mix of fear and hope, that pierced through the emotional defenses Michael had built over the years. After a moment's hesitation, he turned off the engine and stepped out into the biting cold. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the children. "Hey there," Michael said, his voice softer than he had intended. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy stared at him in silence, his large, wary eyes betraying both fear and distrust. His hold on the baby tightened protectively as the infant stirred, but remained asleep. Crouching to the child's level, Michael spoke again. "My name is Michael. What's yours?" After a long pause, the boy whispered, "Harry." "Harry," Michael repeated with a gentle smile. "And who's this?" He nodded towards the baby. "Andy," Harry replied quietly. "He's my brother." Michael nodded, though his mind raced. He knew the right thing to do was to call the authorities, but something about Harry's guarded expression, the way he cradled Andy with such care, made Michael hesitate. "It's not safe out here for you and Andy. How about you come with me? I can take you somewhere warm," Michael offered. Harry's eyes widened in suspicion. "You won't separate us?" The question hit Michael hard, a stark reminder of how vulnerable these children were. "No," he said firmly. "I promise you'll stay together." After what felt like an eternity, Harry nodded. Michael helped him to his feet, noticing how thin the boy was, shivering against the cold night air. He wrapped his coat around both Harry and Andy as they climbed into his car. As the heat filled the car's interior, Michael found himself at a loss for words. He should have been calling child services, not taking 2 abandoned kids home. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Harry's tired eyes, his grip tight around the sleeping Andy, Michael knew he couldn't do it. Not tonight. The drive back to his mansion was filled with silence. Harry didn't speak, and Michael didn't know what to say. His thoughts swirled, questioning why he'd done what he did, but finding no clear answer. Still, amidst the confusion, he felt a strange sense of peace, as if something deep inside him had made the right choice. As the gates of his estate came into view, Michael made up his mind. He would give the kids a safe place for the night and figure out the rest in the morning. Little did he know this small act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Pulling up to the mansion, the headlights illuminated its grand facade. He looked back at Harry and Andy, both fast asleep, and felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest. For the first time in years, Michael Grant, the man known for making cold, calculated decisions, found himself acting purely on emotion. The feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. The mansion, usually a quiet sanctuary of order, now felt charged with an unfamiliar energy. Standing in the doorway of the guest room, Michael watched as Jane Harper, his longtime housekeeper, fussed over Harry and Andy. Freshly bathed and dressed in oversized t-shirts, the children looked completely out of place in the lavish surroundings. "Mr. Thornton," Mrs. Harper whispered as she approached, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure about this? Shouldn't we notify the authorities?" Michael's jaw tightened. He had been asking himself the same question all night. "Not yet, Jane," he said quietly. "Let's give them one night of peace. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Mrs. Harper nodded and left the room, leaving Michael alone with the children. He sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes darting around the room, unsure of what to say or do next. Andy, blissfully unaware of the tension, gurgled happily in a makeshift crib. "You're safe here," Michael said, awkwardly trying to use a comforting tone. "Get some sleep." Harry nodded, but didn't take his eyes off Michael as he backed out of the room. Once in the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall and let out a heavy breath. What had he gotten himself into? The next morning didn't bring the clarity Michael had hoped for. He woke to the sound of a baby's cry echoing through the mansion. For a moment, it felt like a strange dream, but as he made his way downstairs, the reality of the previous night hit him. In the kitchen, Miss Harper was trying to feed Andy, who was more interested in making a mess with pureed carrots. Harry sat at the counter, watching with a mix of amusement and worry. "Good morning," Michael said, feeling oddly out of place in his own home. Harry's head snapped up, tension rippling through his small frame. "Are you going to call the police now?" he asked, his voice quiet, but filled with defiance. The question hung heavy in the air. Michael knew he should. His rational mind screamed for him to, but something held him back. "Not yet," he said, even surprising himself. "But Harry, I need to know what happened. Why were you and Andy out there alone?" Harry's face darkened, his young features hardening into a mask of distrust. "I can't tell you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "He'll find us." The cryptic response sent a chill down Michael's spine. Who was he? What danger were these children running from? Before Michael could ask further, the doorbell rang, its chime shattering the tense atmosphere. Mrs. Harper rushed to answer it, returning with a pale expression. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice trembling. "The police are here to see you." Michael's heart raced. How had they known? Had someone seen him with the children last night? As he made his way to the foyer, he could hear Harry's panicked breathing behind him. Two officers stood in the entrance, their faces serious. "Mr. Michael Grant?" one of them asked, her sharp eyes scanning the opulent surroundings. "Yes, that's me," Michael replied, striving for a calm he didn't quite feel. "I'm Detective Sarah Brooks, and this is my partner, Detective James Hayes," she said, flashing her badge. "We're here about a report we received last night. A man matching your description was seen picking up 2 children from the streets. We need to ask you some questions." Michael's mind raced, acutely aware of Harry's terrified gaze behind him. In that moment, he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his life. "Of course, detectives," he said smoothly, drawing on years of experience negotiating tense business deals. "But perhaps we could discuss this in my study. It's a rather delicate matter." Detective Brooks raised an eyebrow, but nodded. As Michael led them toward the study, he caught Mrs. Harper's eye, silently signaling her to keep the children out of sight. Once in the study, Michael stood before the detectives, his heart racing though his exterior remained calm. "I understand how this might look," Michael began, his voice measured. "But I assure you, my only intention was to help those children." "Mr. Thornton," Detective Hayes interrupted, his tone stern, "regardless of your intentions, taking children off the street is a serious matter. We need to know exactly what happened." For the next hour, Michael carefully recounted the events of the previous night, deliberately omitting details that could lead the detectives directly to Harry and Andy before he had a chance to fully understand the situation. He could see the skepticism in their expressions, the unspoken question of why a wealthy businessman would get personally involved in such a case. "I get your concern," Michael said as he finished, "but I couldn't leave them out there. They were scared alone. I just wanted to help." Detective Brooks studied him, her sharp eyes probing. "Mr. Thornton, while your actions may have been well-intentioned, we need to see the children. We have to ensure their safety and try to locate their family." Michael felt a flash of panic. He wasn't ready to give Harry and Andy over to anyone, not when there was clearly more to their story. But he also knew he couldn't block a police investigation. "Of course," he said, his mind racing for a solution. "But they've been through a lot. Perhaps it would be best to have a child psychologist present when you talk to them, just to ensure their well-being." Detective Hayes frowned. "That's not standard procedure." Brooks cut him off. "Actually, given the circumstances, that's not a bad idea. We'll arrange for a specialist to come tomorrow. In the meantime, Mr. Thornton," she continued, "the children will remain in your care, but understand, you're now part of an ongoing investigation." As the detectives left, Michael felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He'd bought some time, but the real challenges were just beginning. Turning back towards the kitchen, he saw Harry peeking around the corner, his wide eyes filled with both fear and a glimmer of hope. In that moment, Michael realized that he had unintentionally taken on the role of protector for these children. Their fates were now entwined, and no matter how difficult the road ahead, he couldn't turn back. The following morning dawned with a heavy sense of foreboding. Michael had spent the night tossing and turning, his mind consumed by the implications of his actions and the looming arrival of the detectives and child psychologist. As he entered the kitchen, he found Harry already awake, sitting quietly at the counter, his eyes never leaving Michael. "Good morning, Harry," Michael said, trying to sound reassuring. "Did you sleep okay?" Harry shrugged, his small frame tense. "Is today when they take us away?" The question, spoken so matter-of-factly, made Michael's heart tighten. "No one is taking you away," he promised, though he wasn't sure how he would keep that vow. "Some people are coming to talk to you, but I'll be right here the whole time." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Harper, who had been quietly preparing breakfast, went to answer it. She returned with the detectives and a woman Michael assumed was the child psychologist. "Mr. Thornton," Detective Books greeted him. "This is Dr. Lisa Walker, a specialist in child psychology. She'll be assisting us today." Dr. Walker, a kind-looking woman in her 40s, smiled warmly at Harry. "Hello there. You must be Harry. I'm Dr. Walker, but you can call me Lisa if you'd like." Harry remained silent, his eyes darting nervously between Michael and the newcomers. Andy, sensing the tension, began to fuss in his high chair. "Why don't we move to the living room?" Michael suggested, hoping to ease the situation. It might be more comfortable for everyone. Once settled in the living room, with Harry perched nervously on the sofa beside Michael and Andy resting quietly in Michael's arms, the questioning began. Dr. Walker's gentle demeanor eventually coaxed a few responses from Harry. "Can you tell me how you and Andy ended up on the street?" she asked softly. Harry twisted his fingers in his shirt, his voice barely a whisper. "We had to run away." "Run away from where?" Detective Books interjected, her pen poised. Harry's eyes widened, and he pressed closer to Michael, who instinctively put an arm around him. "It's okay," Michael murmured. "You're safe here." Dr. Walker shot Detective Books a warning glance before turning back to Harry. "You've been very brave, Harry. You've protected your little brother. Can you tell us who you were running from?" Harry shook his head vigorously, tears brimming in his eyes. "I can't," he choked out. "He'll find us. He always finds us." The room fell into a heavy silence. Michael felt a chill run through him. Who was he? What kind of danger were these children in? Detective Hayes cleared his throat. "Harry, we want to help you and Andy, but to do that, we need to know more. Can you tell us your last name?" Harry looked up at Michael, his eyes pleading. Michael nodded encouragingly, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Blackwood," Harry whispered. "Our last name is Blackwood." The name hit Michael like a sledgehammer. Blackwood. It couldn't be a coincidence. His mind raced back to the photo on his desk, the smiling face of Daniel Whitmore, his former friend and business partner. But Daniel had never mentioned having children. Detective Books's sharp intake of breath told Michael she recognized the name too. "Harry," she asked carefully, "is your father's name Daniel Whitmore?" Harry's reaction was immediate. His small body shook as he let out a terrified whimper and buried his face in Michael's side. Andy, sensing his brother's fear, began to wail. "I think that's enough for now," Michael said firmly, pulling both children close. "They're clearly upset." Dr. Walker nodded. "We've made good progress today. Harry, you've been very brave. We'll stop here. But we may need to talk again soon, okay? As the detectives and Dr. Walker prepared to leave, Detective Brooks pulled Michael aside. "Mr. Thornton, a word in private." In the study, away from Harry's ears, Detective Brooks fixed Michael with an intense stare. "You know that name, don't you? Daniel Whitmore." Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We were business partners years ago, but I had no idea he had children. Our association ended badly." "How badly?" Hayes asked, his eyes narrowing. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I pushed him out of the company. It wasn't my finest moment, but that was over a decade ago. I haven't heard from him since." The detectives exchanged a look. "Mr. Thornton," Brooks said slowly, "Daniel Whitmore has been on our radar for some time. After your business fallout, he went underground. There have been rumors of involvement in some illegal activities, but nothing concrete," Detective Brooks said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And now, his children turn up on the street, and you, of all people, are the one to find them." The implication lingered between them, thick with suspicion. Michael felt a flash of indignation rise in his chest. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with this? I told you, I had no idea they were Dominic's children." "We're not suggesting anything," Hayes replied, though his tone suggested quite the opposite. "But you have to admit, it's a remarkable coincidence." Michael's mind raced. Could Daniel be behind this? Was it some kind of twisted revenge scheme? But why involve his own children? It didn't make sense. None of it did. He felt the familiar sensation of control slipping away, something he had never liked. "What happens now?" Michael asked, suddenly feeling as though the ground beneath him was shifting. "For now, the children stay here," Brooks said, her voice matter-of-fact. "You're a person of interest in this investigation, Mr. Thornton. Don't leave town. We'll be in touch." As the detectives left, Michael stood in the foyer, watching the door close behind them. His world had tilted on its axis. What had begun as an attempt to help two abandoned children was now a tangled web of mystery and suspicion, with shadows from his past creeping into the present. From the living room, he could hear Harry's quiet sobs and Mrs. Harper's gentle murmurs of comfort. Taking a deep breath, Michael steeled himself. Whatever was going on, whatever Dominic's involvement might be, one thing was crystal clear. Harry and Andy needed protection, and no matter the risks or complications, Michael was determined to give it. He wasn't about to walk away now. With renewed resolve, he returned to the living room, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The game had changed, but Michael Grant was no stranger to high-stakes battles. This time, however, the stakes weren't measured in profits or market dominance. They were the futures of two innocent children. In the days that followed, the Thornton mansion settled into a new, uneasy routine. Michael, once a master of discipline and structure, found his life turned upside down by the constant hum of childcare. Andy's cries pierced the quiet halls, while Harry remained ever watchful, his silence heavy with unspoken fears. Michael, usually a man who thrived on control, found himself in uncharted waters, navigating the chaos that had become his new normal. But beneath the disruption, Michael noticed something else. A warmth he hadn't expected. Every time Harry let his guard down enough to share a shy smile, or when Andy's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, something unfamiliar stirred in Michael's chest. A protective instinct, one he hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. Yet, under the surface of this newfound domesticity, a storm was brewing. The revelation that Harry and Andy were Daniel Whitmore's children had cracked open a Pandora's box of unanswered questions and lingering suspicions. Each night, Michael sat in his study, poring over old records, trying to piece together what had happened to Dominic. The puzzle was incomplete, with crucial details still eluding him. One evening, as he sat surrounded by stacks of papers, deep in thought, a soft knock at the door pulled him from his concentration. He looked up to see Harry standing there, small and unsure against the backdrop of the large, imposing room. "Harry," Michael said, quickly moving to cover the documents he'd been reading, "is everything okay?" The boy nodded, but hesitated at the door. "I had a bad dream," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael felt a surge of protectiveness, a need to reassure him. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently. Harry shook his head but stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the walls of books and the large desk. "This room. It looks like his," Harry said quietly. Michael's pulse quickened. "Whose room?" "My father's," Harry replied, his face darkening. "He had a room like this, with lots of books and a big desk." Michael seized the opportunity, carefully leaning forward. "Harry, can you tell me more about your father? About what happened?" Harry's eyes widened with fear, but there was also something else, a deep need to let it out, to unburden himself. His small hands fidgeted as he struggled to form the words. He changed," Harry whispered, his voice trembling. Michael's stomach knotted. "Changed how?" he asked softly, sensing that Harry was on the verge of revealing something important. "He wasn't always like this," Harry continued haltingly. "He used to be nice. He used to laugh and play with us. But then, after a while, he stopped. He started meeting with people who made me scared." Michael's breath caught. Daniel had always been ambitious, but this sounded far darker than mere business. "Do you know who those people were?" Michael pressed gently, careful not to overwhelm the boy. Harry shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know. But after they started coming, everything changed. He was always angry. And then, one night he told me to take Andy and run. He said he'd come find us, but I don't think he's coming." Michael's heart ached for Harry. Daniel had sent his children away, possibly to protect them. But from what? Or from whom? The mystery deepened, but one thing was clear. Harry was terrified, and Daniel had vanished into the shadows, leaving his children to fend for themselves. "You're safe here," Michael said, his voice steady. "No one is going to hurt you or Andy. I promise." Harry looked up at him, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "But what if he finds us?" Michael's jaw clenched. He didn't have the answer to that, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let Daniel or anyone else hurt these children. "If he comes, I'll be here," Michael said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time since arriving, Harry seemed to relax, even if only a little. He gave a small nod before slipping out of the room, casting one last glance at the desk that reminded him so much of his father's. As the door clicked shut, Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Who had Daniel become? What had he gotten himself involved in? And why, after all this time, had his children been thrust into Michael's life? Michael knew he was in deep now. This wasn't just about keeping the kids safe. It was about getting to the bottom of whatever Daniel Whitmore had been running from. The stakes were higher than Michael could have imagined, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he had the upper hand. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let these kids down. Not now. Not ever. Whatever was coming, Michael Grant would face it head-on. Harry's voice trembled as he recounted the events, his small body tense against Michael's side. Michael's heart clenched with each word, the weight of the boy's trauma settling heavily on his shoulders. "I took the gun," Harry whispered, his eyes wide and haunted. "I was so scared, but I wanted to protect her. When I got to their room, Father, he was standing over her. She wasn't moving. I pointed the gun at him. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The implications of Harry's confession hit him like a freight train, but he fought to maintain a calm exterior. The boy was clearly on the edge, and Michael knew that reacting too strongly could make things worse. "And then what happened, Harry?" Michael asked, his voice gentle but firm, encouraging the boy to continue at his own pace. Harry's eyes filled with tears, his voice barely a whisper. He turned and saw me. He didn't look scared. He just smiled. And then he said something I don't understand. Michael's pulse quickened. "What did he say, Harry?" Harry swallowed hard, blinking away the tears that threatened to spill over. He said, "You're just like me." The boy's voice cracked as he recalled the words, and he clutched at Michael's shirt, seeking comfort. "I didn't understand. I still don't." Michael's mind raced. Daniel Whitmore had been involved in something far darker than he had realized. What kind of man would say that to his own son after everything? But Michael pushed those thoughts aside for now. Harry needed him to stay present, to be a steady anchor in the storm of his emotions. "You're not like him, Harry," Michael said firmly, his hand resting reassuringly on the boy's shoulder. "You're nothing like him." Harry looked up at him, his eyes searching Michael's face for some kind of reassurance, something to hold on to. "But I had the gun. I wanted to hurt him." Michael shook his head gently. "Wanting to protect someone you love doesn't make you like him. You did what you thought you had to do to protect your mum. That's not the same thing as hurting someone out of cruelty." Harry remained quiet for a long time, his gaze drifting to the horizon as the sun began to dip below the trees. "I didn't shoot him," he whispered. "I couldn't. I dropped the gun and ran. I grabbed Andy, and we left." Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The knot in his chest loosened slightly, but the gravity of Harry's situation was still overwhelming. What had happened in that house, and what role had Daniel truly played in all of this? Michael had too many unanswered questions, but one thing was clear. Harry had been through more than any child should ever have to endure. "You did the right thing, Harry," Michael said quietly. "You got Andy, and you ran. You protected your brother." Harry's voice was barely audible as he responded. "But I couldn't protect her." Michael's heart ached for the boy. He knew the guilt Harry carried was too heavy for someone so young, but it was a burden he had taken on, whether it was deserved or not. "None of this is your fault," Michael said softly. "You did everything you could." Harry didn't respond, but he leaned into Michael's side, seeking the comfort and safety he so desperately needed. Michael wrapped an arm around the boy, pulling him close, his mind swirling with the implications of what Harry had shared. Whatever had happened that night, it was clear that Daniel Whitmore had been involved in something far more sinister than Michael had ever suspected. And now, those shadows were closing in on them. As they sat in silence, Michael knew that the game had just changed. The stakes were even higher now, and the danger was more real than ever. Daniel was still out there, somewhere, and Michael had no doubt that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. But as he looked down at Harry, still curled up against him, and thought of Andy asleep inside the house, Michael felt a surge of determination. Whatever it took, he would protect these children. Daniel might have been a powerful man once, but Michael was no stranger to high-stakes battles. This time, though, the stakes were far more personal. Later that night, as Michael sat alone in his study, his mind replayed Harry's words over and over. He knew he needed to tell Sarah, to loop her in on what Harry had revealed. But as he picked up his phone to call her, a part of him hesitated. How much of this was the investigation, and how much of it was becoming deeply personal. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and he looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her expression serious. "We need to talk," she said, stepping into the room. Michael nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. "I know," he said quietly. "I've just learned something about Dominic. Something that changes everything." Sarah's brow furrowed in concern. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Michael recounted what Harry had told him, every detail of that fateful night. As he spoke, Sarah's face grew more serious, her eyes darkening with the weight of the revelation. When he finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. "We need to act on this," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "If Daniel is capable of that, if he was hurting his wife, his family, this changes everything." Michael nodded in agreement, the gravity of the situation settling in. "What do we do next?" Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We find him. We get to him, before he can hurt anyone else." Michael's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what was to come pressing down on him. The game was far from over, and now, more than ever, he knew that everything was at stake. But one thing was certain: Daniel Whitmore had underestimated him. And this time, Michael Graham wasn't going to back down. "Let's end this," Michael said, his voice steady with resolve. Sarah nodded, her eyes locking with his. Together. Michael's mind raced as he tried to process everything. Harry had shot his father, Daniel Whitmore might be dead. And now they were entangled in a web of corruption that reached far beyond anything Michael had imagined. The safe house, which had been their sanctuary, suddenly felt fragile. Its walls no match for the dark forces closing in on them. Judge Harper, a man Michael had once respected, sat before him, a broken figure who had become part of the very corruption he was confessing. Sarah, ever the composed detective, leaned forward, her sharp gaze locked on the judge as he laid out the tangled mess of deception and power plays that had brought them to this moment. "They want control of your company, Michael," Judge Harper said, his voice hollow. "Your resources, your influence. They believe it will give them the leverage they need. Daniel Whitmore's associates saw an opportunity the moment Harry shot his father. They've been using the children as pawns to manipulate you." Michael clenched his fists, anger bubbling up inside him. "So they've been pulling the strings all along. And Blackwood, is he dead or not?" The judge hesitated. "We don't know for certain. If Whitmore is dead, they've done a damn good job of hiding it. His associates have kept the threat of him alive, using it to control the narrative. But now, with this revelation, we have a chance to expose everything. The corruption, the manipulation. If we play this right, we can bring them all down." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she considered the judge's words. "And why should we trust you? You've been part of this from the beginning. What's to stop you from turning on us again?" Judge Harper met Sarah's gaze with a look of deep regret. "Because I've hit my breaking point. I won't let them use these children any longer. I won't be part of this anymore. You have my word. I'll help you, even if it costs me everything." Michael stood, pacing the room, his mind swirling with the weight of it all. Harry and Andy had been used as leverage against him, and now they were caught in the middle of a battle between forces far more powerful and dangerous than he had anticipated. His anger turned to a steely resolve. He wouldn't let these children be pawns any longer. "We need to move quickly," Michael said, his voice firm. "If we're going to take them down, we need to be strategic. This isn't just about protecting Harry and Andy anymore. It's about dismantling this entire network." Sarah nodded, already thinking ahead. "We'll need to gather as much evidence as possible, get into the records of your company, see who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes. We can use Judge Harper testimony, but we need hard proof." "I'll cooperate fully," Judge Harper agreed. I can give you names, documents, whatever you need." Michael paused, then turned to Sarah, concern etched on his face. "What about Harry? He's been through too much already. This revelation about what happened with his father, it changes everything. How do we protect him from all of this?" Sarah's expression softened, her detective instincts momentarily giving way to compassion. "We'll need to keep this from him for now. Harry's already carrying the weight of what happened. He doesn't need to know how deeply this goes, at least not yet. We'll focus on keeping him and Andy safe while we work on unraveling the corruption." Michael nodded, grateful for her level-headedness in the face of chaos. "I've already arranged for a child psychologist to come. Harry needs help to process everything that's happened, but we can't let him feel guilty for protecting his mother." As the conversation continued, the tension between Michael and Sarah remained palpable, but there was a new sense of purpose in the air. They were no longer just reacting to the chaos. They were formulating a plan to bring the entire operation down. And as Michael looked at Sarah, he realized how much he had come to rely on her, not just as a detective, but as a partner in this fight. The flicker of attraction between them, which had surfaced in quieter moments, was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now, there was no time for distractions. Their focus had to be on the children, on exposing the corruption that had twisted the system they once believed in. Judge Harper cleared his throat, pulling Michael from his thoughts. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice low. "The people we're up against, they won't hesitate to use violence if they feel cornered. You, Harry, Andy, you're all in danger now. We need to be careful, or this could spiral out of control fast." Michael felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance. We go on the offensive. I'll use every resource I have to bring them down." Sarah stood, determination hardening her expression. "We'll start by digging into Blackwood's associates. If we can identify who's behind the cover-up, we can bring them down, piece by piece." As they solidified their plan, Michael realized that everything he had built, his empire, his power, was now secondary to one goal: protecting Harry and Andy and ensuring they were never used again. He had spent his life fighting for control, but now he was fighting for something far more important. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael sat alone in the living room, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind drifted to Harry and Andy, asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm that was about to break around them. He had been many things in his life: ruthless, ambitious, calculating. But as he thought about the two children who had come into his care, he realized that this fight wasn't about power or wealth. It was about family, about doing what was right, no matter the cost. And Michael Grant was prepared to risk everything to protect the family he had unexpectedly found. Michael sat on the edge of Harry's bed, looking down at the boy's wide, anxious eyes. He could see the fear that had taken root in Harry since their arrival at the safe house, and it weighed heavily on him. The innocent trust in those eyes tore at Michael's heart, and he knew he had to be honest, but careful. "The bad men won't get to you or Andy," Michael said softly, brushing a stray hair from Harry's forehead. "I promise you that. Sarah, Judge Harper and I, we're doing everything we can to keep you safe." Harry looked up at him, his small hands clutching the blanket tightly. "But what if they find us? What if they hurt you?" Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected to feel this deeply protective over the two children, but they had become his world. The thought of anything happening to them, or even to himself, leaving them without protection, was unbearable. He took a deep breath, calming the storm of emotions. "I won't let anything happen to any of us," he said firmly. "I'll fight for you and Andy, no matter what. We're a team now, and teams protect each other." Harry's lip quivered, but he nodded, taking some comfort in Michael's words. Michael leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to the boy's forehead. "Now try to get some sleep. You need your strength for when this is all over, and we can do something fun. Maybe a trip to the beach, Harry's eyes lit up slightly at the mention of the beach, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I've never been to the beach," he whispered. Michael's chest tightened with a mix of sadness and determination. "Then we'll go. I'll make sure of it." After tucking Harry in and ensuring Andy was sound asleep in the adjoining room, Michael stood in the doorway for a moment watching over them. It was a quiet, tender scene, and for a fleeting moment, the looming danger felt distant. But Michael knew better. Danger was just outside, waiting to break through. As Michael returned to the living room, he found Sarah finishing her latest round of phone calls. Her face was a mask of concentration, but he could see the exhaustion creeping into her eyes. Despite everything, she hadn't wavered, and Michael's admiration for her only grew. "How's Harry?" she asked, her voice softening as she met his gaze. "He's scared," Michael admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "They both are, and I don't blame them." Sarah sighed, leaning back against the table. "It's hard for them to understand what's going on. All they know is that they're in danger. But we'll keep them safe, Michael." "We will," Michael nodded, his expression grim. "It's just hard seeing them like this. I've never had anyone to protect before, not like this. And now I don't know. It's like they've become my entire world." Sarah's eyes softened at his confession. "You're doing an incredible job with them. They trust you. And that's what matters most." There was a brief pause, a moment of shared understanding between them. The bond they had formed was undeniable, even as they tried to focus solely on the case. Michael felt it every time their eyes met. This was more than just a professional partnership. Sarah cleared her throat, trying to shake off the tension that lingered between them. "Judge Harper is working on getting the final pieces of evidence we need. If we play this right, we'll have them trapped." Michael glanced out the window, his thoughts returning to the looming threat. "And what happens when they realize they've been played? They won't back down without a fight." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes determined. "Then we fight back. We've come too far to let them win now." Michael admired her resolve, but there was something deeper pulling at him. The vulnerability she tried so hard to hide beneath her tough exterior, the compassion that seeped through in the quiet moments with the kids. She wasn't just a detective fighting for justice. She was someone who cared deeply, someone who believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. "Sarah," Michael said quietly, "I want you to know something." She turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "No matter what happens, I'm grateful for everything you've done, for the kids, for me. I couldn't have done this without you." Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment, the weight of their situation lifted as she smiled at him. "We're in this together, Michael." Before either of them could say anything more, a knock at the door shattered the stillness of the room. Both of them froze, their eyes immediately locking. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her gun. "I'll check it out," she whispered, moving silently toward the door. Michael's heart raced as he followed a few steps behind, every muscle in his body tensed for whatever was coming. As Sarah peered through the peephole, she let out a breath of relief and glanced back at him. "It's Judge Harper." Michael exhaled, but the sense of unease still lingered as Sarah opened the door to let the judge in. Judge Harper stepped inside, his face drawn and tired. There was a tension in his features that immediately set Michael on edge. "What's going on?" Michael asked. "I've just received word," the judge began, his voice low. We've pinpointed where Dominic's associates are planning their next move. It's happening soon, within the next 48 hours. They're going after everything. Your company, your assets, and... He hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the children's bedroom door. They're coming for the kids. Michael's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The children are leverage, Judge Harper explained. They've been planning to use them as bargaining chips, a way to force you into giving them what they want. And now that they know you're fighting back, they won't hesitate. Michael's hands clenched into fists. The thought of Harry and Andy being taken, used as pawns, it was unthinkable. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice hard with determination. We set the trap, Judge Harper said. We lure them in with the board meeting, but we need to be ready. When they make their move, we strike. Michael nodded, his mind already racing with the logistics. He had been preparing for this, but the reality of it, the danger, the stakes, was far more intense than he had imagined. He glanced at Sarah, who met his gaze with the same fire and resolve he felt burning in his chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As Judge Harper outlined the plan, Michael's thoughts drifted back to Harry and Andy. He would do anything to protect them. And now, more than ever, he was prepared to fight with everything he had to ensure they were safe. The game had changed once again, and Michael was ready for the battle that lay ahead. Harry's quiet, solemn nod had carried more weight than Michael could have anticipated. I trust you, the boy had whispered, those 3 simple words embedding themselves deep within Michael's heart. The enormity of the trust Harry had placed in him both terrified and empowered him, giving him a sense of purpose that was entirely new. Leaning down, Michael pressed a soft kiss to the boy's forehead, a gesture that felt instinctive, something he hadn't realized he was capable of until this very moment. "Get some sleep, buddy," Michael whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." As Michael quietly shut the bedroom door behind him, he found Sarah waiting in the hallway, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the responsibility he now carried. "You're good with them," she said softly. "They're lucky to have you." Michael shook his head, a mixture of humility and gratitude coursing through him. "I'm the lucky one. They've changed me, Sarah, in ways I never thought possible." Sarah stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm, her touch both grounding and comforting. "I've seen it. The Michael Grant I first met would never have risked everything for 2 orphaned children." Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, the air between them buzzed with unspoken emotions, a connection forged in shared danger and trust. But before either could act on the tension simmering beneath the surface, the sound of Judge Harper's arrival broke the moment, pulling them back to the pressing matters at hand. In the dimly lit makeshift war room that had once been Michael's study, the 3 of them gathered around a table covered in documents, laptops, and evidence Judge Harper had painstakingly collected. The gravity of the situation was palpable, and the tension in the room thickened as they went over the details of their plan. "The board meeting is set for tomorrow," Michael began, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning within him. "I've leaked information about my intention to step down and hand over control of the company. If our suspicions are correct, that should force their hand." Sarah, always a few steps ahead, nodded in agreement. "We'll have undercover agents stationed throughout the building. Judge Harper evidence has helped us identify key players we need to watch closely." Michael couldn't help but bring up what mattered most to him. "What about Harry and Andy?" "The kids will be moved to a secure location just before the meeting," Judge Harper assured him. "Only the 3 of us will know where they are." As they went over the final details of the plan, Michael's anxiety mixed with determination. He was used to high-stakes situations, but this was different. This wasn't about his company or his wealth. It was about the lives of 2 children who had come to mean everything to him. "There's still time to back out," Sarah said softly, her gaze holding his with a mixture of concern and something deeper. "No one would blame you for putting the children first and walking away." Michael shook his head, his jaw set with resolve. "No. This goes beyond me and the kids now. These people have ruined lives. How many more children are at risk? We have to stop them." Judge Harper nodded in approval, though his face remained grim. "It won't be easy. These people have resources, influence. They'll fight back, hard." "Then we'll give them one hell of a fight," Michael said, the steel in his voice clear. As the night wore on, and they prepared for the confrontation ahead, Michael found himself standing in the doorway of the children's room. Harry and Andy slept peacefully, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. In that quiet moment, watching their innocent faces, Michael made a vow. "No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter the cost, I'll make sure these children have a future free from fear." He heard Sarah's footsteps approach, her presence steady and reassuring as she joined him at the door. Their shoulders brushed, and the simple touch anchored him. "We should get some rest," Sarah whispered, her voice gentle. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Michael nodded, but didn't move. His eyes lingered on Harry and Andy, and he spoke without looking away. "I keep thinking about how much my life has changed since that night I found them. I was so focused on wealth, on power. I thought I had everything figured out." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And now?" "Now," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "I realize I had nothing that truly mattered. These kids, they've given me a purpose I never knew I was missing." They stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of tomorrow's battle hanging over them. Yet in that small pocket of time, there was peace. Together they watched over the sleeping children, each of them reflecting on how deeply they had been changed by this journey. The following morning, the calm before the storm lingered, but the tension was undeniable. Michael, Sarah, and Judge Harper moved with purpose, finalizing their strategy as the board meeting loomed. The safe house had transformed into the center of a carefully orchestrated operation, with agents on standby, prepared for the fallout that was sure to come. Harry and Andy were kept busy, their innocent laughter echoing through the halls, a stark contrast to the dangerous reality outside. Michael found himself constantly reassuring them, his heart aching as he tried to hide the fear in his eyes. Harry's question from the night before echoed in his mind. Are the bad men coming? Michael had given the boy his promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter what. As the day wore on, the moment of truth arrived. Michael stood in front of the mirror, straightening his suit jacket, feeling the weight of the plan they had set into motion. He wasn't the same man who had once thrived on the cold calculations of business deals. He was fighting for something far more precious now, the future of two children who had unknowingly become the heart of his world. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her own expression a mixture of steely determination and quiet strength. It's time. Michael nodded, his resolve solidifying. Let's finish this. With one final glance at the children, who were being escorted to their secure location, Michael stepped out of the safe house, ready to face the battle ahead. The game had changed. It wasn't about profit, power, or control anymore. This was about justice, about family, and about protecting the ones who mattered most. As Michael and Sarah walked side by side into the unknown, they knew they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future where Harry and Andy could grow up safe, loved, and free from the shadows of corruption. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As they finally turned to leave the room, Michael cast one last glance at the children. We're going to give them the future they deserve, he said, his words serving as much as a promise to himself As to Sarah, she gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "We will. Together." That night, as Michael lay awake in bed, his mind didn't focus on the risks ahead or the intricacies of their plan. Instead, he found himself imagining a future he had never considered before, one with Harry and Andy, and with Sarah by his side. A future where the walls he'd built around his heart had fallen, replaced by the warmth of a real family. With that comforting thought, Michael finally drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the new day would bring. The man who once lived for wealth and power no longer existed. In his place was someone ready to risk it all for love, justice, and the future of 2 children who had become his entire world. The morning of the board meeting arrived under a grey, overcast sky, as if the weather itself understood the gravity of what lay ahead. Michael stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with slightly trembling hands. The face staring back at him no longer belonged to the confident, cutthroat businessman he once was. Instead, his eyes were filled with determination, but also fear, and a deep love for the 2 children who had changed his life forever. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah entered, her usual police uniform swapped for a smart business suit that would allow her to blend in at the company's headquarters. "It's time," she said quietly. "The security team is ready to move Harry and Andy." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I need to say goodbye first." In the children's room, Harry was already awake, his young face serious as he watched Michael walk in. Andy, too little to understand, babbled cheerfully in his crib. Michael crouched down to Harry's level. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Remember what we talked about? You and Andy are going on a little trip with some really nice people today. I'll see you soon, okay?" Harry's lower lip quivered. "Promise?" That one word nearly shattered Michael's resolve. He pulled Harry into a tight hug, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. "I promise, Harry. I'll always come back for you and Andy. Always." As Michael stood to leave, Harry's small hand slipped into his. "Be careful," the boy whispered. "I love you, Michael." The words struck Michael like a physical blow. He knelt down again, looking into Harry's eyes. "I love you too, Harry. You and Andy, more than anything in the world." With a final hug and a soft kiss on Andy's forehead, Michael left the room, his heart heavy, but his determination stronger than ever. The drive to Thornton Enterprises headquarters was tense, the air inside the car thick with anticipation. Michael's mind raced through every potential outcome, every possible way their plan could go wrong. Sitting beside him, Sarah reached for his hand, offering a silent gesture of support that meant more than words could convey. As the car rolled to a stop in front of the towering glass and steel structure, Michael took a deep breath, his nerves coiling tightly inside him. "Ready?" he asked, turning to Sarah, who stood poised with quiet determination. She gave a sharp nod, her eyes hard with resolve. "Let's take these bastards down." Inside the bustling lobby, executives and board members moved hurriedly toward the conference room, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Michael maneuvered through the crowd with practiced ease, offering nods and handshakes to familiar faces, all while acutely aware of the undercover agents strategically placed around the building. In the elevator, as they ascended to the top floor, a sudden wave of doubt crept over him. What if something goes wrong? What if they had miscalculated? Sensing his unease, Sarah gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "We've got this," she whispered, her voice firm but calm. "Remember what we're fighting for." The thought of Harry and Andy flashed before Michael's eyes, bringing with it a renewed sense of focus. He knew exactly what he was fighting for. The boardroom fell silent as Michael entered, all eyes turning toward him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He felt the weight of their stares, the tension in the air, thick as he took his place at the head of the long table. Clearing his throat, he began, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending on such short notice." A ripple of whispers passed through the room. "I've called this meeting to discuss the future leadership of Thornton Enterprises," Michael continued, his gaze scanning the room for signs of the hidden corruption. "For years, I've focused on profits and growth, but recent events have led me to reevaluate those priorities." Out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw Sarah, posing as his assistant, give him a subtle nod, the signal that the trap was in place. "I've decided to step down as CEO," he announced, "and relinquish control of the company." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Michael raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Before I do, there are some troubling issues that need to be addressed." He launched into his carefully crafted speech, outlining vague but alarming discrepancies in the company's recent dealings. As he spoke, he scrutinized the faces of the board members. Most appeared confused or concerned, but a few, those they had already identified as working with Blackwood's criminal network, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Suddenly, the door burst open and James Hargrove, one of the senior VPs, stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous, Thornton," he barked. "You can't just come in here making wild accusations." Michael met his outburst with a cold smile. "I haven't accused anyone of anything yet, James. But your reaction is telling." Hargrove's eyes darted nervously around the room, like an animal caught in a trap. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. You're playing with fire." Michael's expression hardened. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Corruption, blackmail, and using innocent children as leverage in your twisted games." The room went deathly silent. Hargrove's face turned pale, then twisted with rage. In a flash, he pulled a gun from his jacket and aimed it directly at Michael. "You could have just walked away," he snarled. "Now you've forced our hand." Chaos erupted as board members ducked for cover. Sarah moved with lightning speed, drawing her weapon and shouting, "Drop it!" But Hargrove, eyes wild, had already committed. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Michael braced himself for the worst. But the gunshot never came. In a blur of motion, Judge Harper, who had been posing as a new board member, tackled Hargrove from behind. The gun went off, but the bullet harmlessly lodged in the ceiling. Within moments, police officers swarmed the room, arresting Hargrove and several other board members who had already revealed themselves through their guilty expressions. Michael stood still amidst the chaos, his heart pounding. It was over. They had done it. Sarah appeared by his side, her face flushed with adrenaline. "You okay?" Michael nodded, still trying to process everything. "The kids? They're safe," Sarah assured him. "I just got word. The operation was a success. Most of Blackwood's organization has been taken down." Relief washed over Michael so intensely he felt his knees weaken. Sarah caught him, her arms steady and supportive. "It's over," she whispered. "You did it. You kept your promise." As the last of the police secured the scene, Michael found himself drawn to the large windows overlooking the city. The clouds that had darkened the sky all morning were beginning to part, rays of sunlight breaking through. He felt Sarah's presence beside him, her warmth grounding him in the aftermath. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah's hand slipped into his, their fingers intertwining. "Now, we go get your kids." The word "your" sent a surge of warmth through Michael. Yes, they were his kids now, in every way that mattered. As they left the building, dodging reporters and curious onlookers, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The danger had passed, the corruption exposed. Now he could finally focus on what truly mattered, building a life with Harry and Andy. In the car, on the way to the safe house where the children waited, Michael turned to Sarah, his voice soft. "I couldn't have done this without you. You've been everything." Her eyes met his, filled with warmth and something deeper. "We did this together, Michael. And if you'll have me, I'd like to be there for whatever comes next." Michael's heart soared. He leaned in, finally allowing himself to do what he'd been wanting to for weeks. Their lips met in a tender, passionate kiss, a promise for the future. As they pulled apart, Michael felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal battles, media frenzy, and the challenge of helping Harry and Andy heal from their trauma. But for the first time in his life, Michael felt prepared for the fight. Because now, he wasn't facing it alone. He had a family, 2 children who had stolen his heart, and a woman who had stood by him through the darkest times. As the car rolled up to the safe house, Michael spotted 2 small figures waiting on the porch. Harry and Andy, safe and sound, their faces lighting up the moment they saw him. "Ready?" Sarah asked, squeezing his hand. Michael nodded, his heart full. "Ready." Together, they stepped out of the car and into their new life, leaving behind the shadows of the past and embracing the bright future that lay ahead. The legal process to adopt Harry and Andy wasn't easy, especially given the extraordinary circumstances surrounding their case. Michael spent countless hours in meetings with lawyers, child services representatives, and court officials, doing everything in his power to ensure that Harry and Andy would have a permanent, stable home with him. One sunny afternoon, as Michael sat in his home office reviewing adoption paperwork, a soft knock on the door interrupted him. Standing in the doorway was Harry, the light from the hallway casting a small silhouette. "Hey, buddy," Michael greeted warmly, pushing the documents aside. "Everything okay?" Harry nodded quietly and climbed onto Michael's lap, something that had become more common and never failed to warm Michael's heart. "Are we really going to stay with you forever?" Harry asked, his voice small but filled with hope. Michael pulled him close. "That's the plan, kiddo, if that's what you want." For a moment, Harry was silent, his small fingers tracing the pattern on Michael's tie. "What about our real dad? Is he really gone?" Though Michael had expected the question, it still caught him slightly off guard. He and Sarah had agreed to be as honest as they could with Harry, while keeping his age in mind. "Yes, Harry," Michael said gently, "your biological father is gone. But you know, family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who loves you, who takes care of you. And I love you and Andy more than anything." Harry's arms wrapped tightly around Michael's neck. "I love you too, Dad." The word, Dad, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Michael's eyes. He hugged Harry tighter, marveling at how much this little boy had changed his entire life. As the adoption moved forward, Michael put everything into creating a home filled with love for the boys. The cold, empty mansion that had once been a symbol of his success was now a warm, vibrant family home. Colorful artwork adorned the walls, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls. Sarah was always there, a constant source of love and strength for all of them. She had taken a leave of absence from the police force to process everything they'd uncovered and to figure out her next steps. One evening, while they sat together on the porch watching Harry and Andy play in the yard, Sarah turned to Michael with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she began, her hand sliding into his, "about us, about the future. Michael, these past months have made me realize what really matters. And what matters to me is this: you, the boys, and the family we're building." Michael's heart raced as he sensed the gravity of her words. "What are you saying, Sarah?" Taking a deep breath, she replied, "I'm saying I want to be a part of this forever, if you'll have me, not just as your partner, but as a mother to Harry and Andy." A wave of joy surged through Michael. He pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude he felt. When they parted, Sarah smiled and asked, "Is that a yes?" Michael grinned. "That's a definite yes." Just then, Harry's voice called from the yard, "Dad, Sarah, come play with us." Hand in hand, Michael and Sarah joined the boys on the lawn, their laughter mingling with the golden light of the setting sun. As Michael watched his family, Harry's bright smile, Andy's joyful giggling, and Sarah's loving gaze, he felt a completeness he had never known before. The journey ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. There were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild. But standing there, Michael knew that together they could face anything. The man who had once been a hardened businessman had found his true wealth, not in money or power, but in the love of two small boys and the woman who had stood by his side through it all. 1 year later, the Thornton mansion was alive with activity. Colorful balloons and streamers lined the grand staircase, and the scent of freshly baked cake filled the air. It was Harry's birthday, his first as an official Thornton. Michael stood in the doorway, watching as Sarah helped Harry tie his new shoes. Andy, now a toddler, wobbled around the room, giggling as he chased after balloons. The scene filled Michael's heart with a joy he hadn't known was possible. "Dad, look," Harry called out proudly, showing off his tied laces. "I did it!" Michael crossed the room, ruffling Harry's hair with affection. "Great job, buddy. You're growing up so fast." As guests began to arrive, friends from Harry's new school and their parents, Michael found himself marveling at how much had changed. The mansion, once a symbol of his solitary success, was now filled with love and laughter. Sarah appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled, a reminder of their recent engagement. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, leaning into him. Michael smiled, pulling her closer. "Just thinking about how lucky we are, how perfect everything feels." As they watched Harry blow out his candles, surrounded by friends and family, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. The shadows of the past, Daniel Whitmore, the corruption, the danger, seemed distant now, no longer a threat to the happiness they had built. Michael Grant, once defined by wealth and power, now measured his success by the love of his family. Joining in the chorus of "Happy Birthday," Michael knew without a doubt that this life, this family, was his greatest achievement, and he wouldn't have it any other way. In our pursuit of success, it's easy to build walls around our hearts, thinking that wealth and power will protect us. But true strength lies not in isolation or control. It's found in the vulnerability of love and the courage to open ourselves to others. Life often presents us with unexpected gifts, often disguised as challenges. Sometimes it takes the innocence of a child to teach us what truly matters. Money can buy many things, but it can't buy the trust of a child, the joy of shared laughter, or the fulfillment that comes from making a difference in someone's life. Remember, it's never too late to change your story. Even the hardest heart can be softened by love, and the most ambitious person can become the most devoted parent. Your past doesn't define you. Your choices do. Choose love. Choose family. Choose to be the person someone else needs you to be. In the end, our legacy isn't measured by wealth or power. It's measured by the lives we touch, the love we give, and the positive impact we leave on the world. So when you look back on your life, ask yourself, what will be your true measure of success?